Instructors, are you tired of students showing up unprepared? With Pilot Institute Online Ground School, they show up ready. No more unpaid ground lessons that run long. No more frustrated students blaming you for the slow progress. Instead, you get students who learn quickly, recommend you to friends, and also make your job easier. The result? You build flight hours faster, your students are going to succeed, and then also you get to focus on the flying. With a 99.9% pass rate and 33,000 5-star reviews, we are the ground school that instructors trust. Plus, it's completely free for CFIs. Get your free instructor account today at pilotinstitute.com/instructor.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 99th edition of MentorLIVE, the National Association of Flight Instructors' monthly live broadcast. I'm Karen Kalishek, Chair of NAFI, and your host for this evening. We have a very interesting topic for you and a perfect timing on the 122nd anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flight. Here we are again with a phenomenal improvement in our flight regulation and opportunities. We're going to be discussing the next generation of recreational flight training, Sport Pilot 2.0. Joining us this evening will be Sean Elliott and Tom Charpentier of EAA, two people who were vital to having this new regulation passed and its future success as well. We do want to thank Pilot Institute for sponsoring this evening's broadcast. Thank you very much. Before we enter into the broadcast, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, you can earn Wings credit. So following the broadcast, you'll find that there's at the top of your browser will be the broadcast window. There's a drop-down link. It's the second link that will take you directly to the FAA website where you can complete your quiz and earn your credit. You'll also find following these links that you can find more information about our presenters who you'll meet shortly, a little bit about me. You can also help this organization soar by offering even further and more broadcasting for you by making donations to NAFI. We're a 501c3, so they are fully tax deductible. You can also join NAFI and avail yourself of a lot of additional educational content that we offer specifically for NAFI members, and as well as enjoying our mentorship and advocacy and other educational content. Also, what you'll find is, if we can advance the slide. Okay, during the broadcast, we'll be answering your questions live. So in a moment, I'll be explaining how to access the chat function, which is being monitored by a NAFI board member. So we're going to be having periodic breaks during the broadcast to enter the questions that you input in the chat room. Also be aware that these chat functions are going to give you the opportunity to send us content and ideas for further education and content that can help flight instructors learn more about preparing people for their sport pilot ratings. Okay, sport pilot certificates. Okay, how do you join the chat? You can see, looking at the slides, there's a little 3-dot icon in the bottom right corner. So you click on that bubble. But very important before you start answering your questions is you want to enter your name first, because if you just start typing immediately, that'll show up as your identifier. And we do like to recognize you when we're answering your questions. So it's a very simple process. Join the conversation. Another educational, freely available to all the viewing public, are archived presentations from NAFI's national conference. So we're the only entity that's providing national conference specifically aimed at the CFI audience. And you can see all these presentations. You can use your phones and you can use the QR code and you can access all 28 of these archived presentations. A lot of very valuable content by excellent presenters. Okay, as I said, this is our presentation. So let's introduce our speakers. So Sean Elliott is joining us remotely. So unfortunately, this is what he looks like in real life, but you're only going to hear his voice this evening. So Sean, would you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
You bet, Karen. Thank you so much. Yes, folks, great to be here tonight. Unfortunately, I'm on a flying trip for work in our Cicada TBM. So I'm joining in from an undisclosed location in northern Indiana in a hotel room. But you're in good hands tonight with my right hand, Tom Charpentier. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a part of the senior leadership team at EAA and vice president of advocacy and safety. I have a very strong connection to NAFI. Some of you might recall from previous presentations I've done or reading some of the things I put out in our magazine. From 1996 until the early 2000s, I was the second full-time executive director for NAFI and then president and CEO for a time. And, you know, flight instruction and the flight instructor community is something that's very near and dear to my heart. Karen knows, Tom knows, very strongly connected to my roots, which really was flight training and flight instructing and teaching. The love of sharing that passion of flight is something that's very important to me. I still have a pretty strong role, both from a training perspective and an ops perspective at EAA. I oversee all of our EAA aircraft that we operate, as well as AirVenture aircraft operations. And we have a pretty diverse fleet, as you can see from some of the type ratings I hold and experimental authorizations. I get to fly some cool stuff. I'm very blessed as a pilot and pro. Obviously, also been leading our government advocacy efforts since 2010. And as Karen alluded to, both Tom and myself had some pretty pivotal roles when it comes to how MOSAIC came about and the rule becoming a final part of our reality in general aviation as a major game changer. We're going to talk some about that tonight, of course. Over 10,000, actually just about ready to cross 11,000 hours, pilot and instructor and an examiner also. Karen and I both know the examining world very well. For me, it's not as much in the way of certification work, and nowadays I'm pretty much focused on type ratings and experimental authorizations on some of these really difficult, more rare airplanes that few people have experience in. So great to be here tonight, and look forward to sharing the latest and greatest. So Karen, back to you.
Thank you, Sean, very much. And again, we really appreciate your coming on board. You're a very busy person, and to call in from being on the road is much appreciated. And you actually were, as you said, pivotal, not only to this effort, but to many of the other industry advocacy efforts and communications and connections. Thank you. Tom, you have the flight controls.
All right, I have the PowerPoint controls. Hello, everybody. My name is Tom Charpentier. My title is Government Relations Director here at EAA, working with Sean and a small team that does advocacy at EAA on behalf of our members. I've been doing this for a little over 13 years now, and absolutely love it. I love general aviation advocacy. It's a really fun, exciting, and rewarding field, especially when we can bring to the community breakthroughs like what we're sharing tonight. On the safety side of things, I do quite a bit at the moment. I have been a member of the General Aviation Joint Safety Committee's safety analysis team. Sean is the industry one of the industry co-chairs of the larger executive group, and I've also been co-chairing the System Component Failure Non-Power Plant Working Group that was established under the GAJSC. So that's a group that's taking a look at a really it's a very specific subset of accidents that involve component failure other than the power plant propeller or fuel system. So we just finished our work, and we have some non-regulatory recommendations that are coming out pretty soon on that. Other work I've done at EAA, I have led the effort to put out the flight test manual. So EAA has published a pretty comprehensive manual for flight testing your amateur built aircraft, and that actually led to an FAA endorsed program to use that as a task-based system rather than the traditional way of flight testing a experimental aircraft where you have to go out and fly for 25 or 40 hours. It actually becomes a task-based system where you go through the tasks that we've set out, you build a POH off of that, and when you finish, you're done. And it's that was a really rewarding project, as well as the STC projects that we've done. The Dynon D10 STC and the TrueTrack Vision STC were two very groundbreaking efforts that led to more affordable avionics in the cockpit. So in addition to MOSAIC, I think that's one of the projects that we're most proud of in the advocacy department in recent memory. If my voice is familiar to you, you might have heard it on our podcast, The Green Dot. I was a co-founder of that with my good friends Hal and Chris, and continue to have a lot of fun with that today. And I have a couple fewer hours than Sean. I'm mostly a Sunday flyer. I actually got my certificate, 2011, so 14 years ago tomorrow. I didn't quite get Wright Brothers Day for my check ride date, but came pretty close. And I've had 650 hours since then and picked up my tailwheel endorsement. So.
Tom, you might want to point out to the audience, too, that with your experience as a private pilot and what you do, you are a poster child candidate for a sport pilot CFI pursuant.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk about that. I was going to mention, I know I'm speaking to mostly a group of instructors, and I am not one myself, but I hopefully can give you the perspective of like a Sunday flyer private pilot who's been embroiled in this policy world for a long time, and hopefully a CFI myself at some point soon.
Yeah.
So let's
thank you for all your effort. Thank you for your efforts, Tom. And it's nice to interact regularly with you and Sean on a lot of these industry initiatives as well.
Absolutely, Karen. It's been great working with you, as well as another familiar face at NAFI, Bob Nader, on all of the safety efforts we've been doing over the years. So let's roll into it. So we have a presentation today that's a little bit, if you've seen our MOSAIC presentation before, this is going to be a little bit more pared down and focused version of that. So I'll run through it, I'm not going to rush through it, but I'm going to run through it, as stridently as I can, so that we have plenty of time for questions, and we will break for questions a few times during this presentation. And our contact information, by the way, will be at the end. So just to level set everybody and fundamentally to introduce what MOSAIC is. It's best to think about it this way. Ever since 2004, up until last October, when the new rule took effect, both the Sport Pilot rule and the LSA aircraft certification rule both shared a common definition. So if you were a sport pilot, you had to fly an aircraft meeting the light sport aircraft definition, which was actually a definition within FAR 1.1, 14 CFR 1.1, that in brief was 1,320 pounds gross. If you want to know where that seemingly random number comes from, that's 600 kilograms, so it actually came from Europe. 45 knots stall clean, 2 seats, and 120 knots VH, which if you're not familiar with VH, that's basically maximum cruise at max continuous power. So if you wanted to fly as a sport pilot, it had to meet that definition. If you wanted to build an aircraft as a light sport aircraft, it had to meet that definition. And that common definition kind of held both certificates back a little bit. The sport pilot rule wasn't quite best suited to that light sport aircraft definition. The light sport aircraft rule really had a lot more potential without that common definition kind of holding it. And ultimately, what came out of the MOSAIC rulemaking was a deletion of that common definition. Okay, so now sport pilot's its own thing, and the light sport aircraft category is its own thing. So don't think so much anymore of sport pilot being synonymous with light sport. I know sometimes we use shorthand like I'm a light sport pilot, or something like that, or I'm an LSA pilot, things like that. Now LSA is strictly a term that governs aircraft certification, and we'll talk about what MOSAIC means for that in a little bit. And sport pilot is strictly a term that applies to the sport pilot certificate, and both of those got changed in this rulemaking. So we'll talk briefly actually about both of them right now, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail on both of them in the coming slides. So sport pilot. Previously, it was only 2 seats that you could fly with, and obviously you can only have one occupant, or excuse me, one passenger on board, or instructor, as the case may be. So 2 occupants total on board the aircraft. Now you can fly an aircraft that has up to 4 seats. However, the 2-occupant rule still applies. So you can go fly a 172 or a PA-28 or something like that, but the back seat has to stay empty. Kind of similar to the way that Rec Pilot is done today. The stall speed has gone from, what did we say it was before? It was, 45 clean. It is now 59 knots clean. There is no more weight. So that weight limit has gone away. And now it's basically governed only by that 59 knot clean stall speed. Has to be, generally speaking, it has to be a single engine. There's only a single engine category class rating available for Sport Pilot at the moment, but there's no restriction on the type of engine, except for one caveat, which is that a Sport Pilot cannot get a type rating, and you need a type rating to fly a turbojet aircraft. So that's kind of what precludes that. Previously, it had to be fixed gear unless you were flying a seaplane, and it had to either be a fixed pitch or ground adjustable propeller. Now both retractable landing gear and constant speed props, whether they're manually controlled or automatically controlled, are okay. We'll talk about the additional training and endorsements that you'll need for that in a little bit here. Okay, and then for the light sport category, in brief, the aircraft must meet must continue to meet the ASTM standards that are set forth. So light sport is unique in that there's very little FAA involvement in the aircraft certification process, which makes the certification costs a lot less. But in order to certify the aircraft, it has to meet consensus standards set forth by ASTM. The aircraft can have up to 4 seats. So if you're a private pilot or above, you can fly with four people in the aircraft. That's just a limitation for the Sport Pilot. For the light sport category aircraft, it's 61 knots in landing configuration, so 61 knots dirty. So yes, there are 2 stall speeds, and that's a little bit hard to keep track of sometimes. But for the Sport Pilot, it's 59 knots clean. For the light sport category aircraft, it's 61 knots dirty. There's a tool.
Tom?
Go ahead, Sean. Yeah.
Let me just make a comment about that, because I think as a flight instructor, the easiest way I decouple that, as you described, which is really important, decoupling the pilot's side, the Sport Pilot side, from the light sport category side is a really important thing to grasp. The best way to do that is think in terms of, as a Sport Pilot, I can fly any airplane. Any airplane, doesn't matter the certification basis, standard category, experimental, primary category, light sport, anything that meets those definitions that you just outlined. Doesn't matter the cert basis of the airplane. That's just what the pilot is eligible to fly. The light sport category is for the manufacturers to be able to build new airplanes in a more affordable way that come with the latest innovations, the latest opportunities that, in some cases, Sport Pilots won't be allowed to fly because their criteria to meet those requirements as a light sport category do not meet the Sport Pilot eligibility. So, and that's okay. It's still going to enable new manufacturing. So I just wanted to add that little perspective that, as a flight instructor, that really helps me when I think through it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good way to think about it, Sean.
Yeah. So in a really quick summary, a Sport Pilot does not have to fly a light sport category aircraft.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
And you can see this update without the restrictions on the type of engine. You could be flying electric aircraft.
You could
or
fly
hydrogen, or
name your hybrid, electric. Exactly, Karen. Exactly. The FAA, I'll give them a lot of credit for this. They were very clever in making sure to not inhibit innovation in what they did with MOSAIC. And when you really think about all the little nuances of this, it's brilliant. It's a really, really impactful rule. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Tom, but I thought that'd be helpful to add that.
No, please, by all means, please keep adding that as I go along. Yeah, and so like Sean said, basically, the light sport category, you used to have to worry about that because it was so linked to the Sport Pilot rule. Now you almost don't even have to think about it. If you're flying a light sport aircraft, it's just as if you're flying a Part 23 aircraft, a standard certified aircraft like a Cessna 172. you don't think about the ins and outs of the certification rules for that aircraft on a daily basis. It's certified. That's all you need to know. And obviously go through the POH and understand how to operate and maintain it and all of that. But you don't have to necessarily worry about the certification rules that come with that aircraft. So yeah, light sport category aircraft. There's also no restriction on the engines. So yes, there could be a twin light sport aircraft in the future. Again, sport pilot probably can't fly it, but you can still certify it. And again, retractable landing gear and constant speed props are okay. So now let's dive a little bit more into the sport pilot rating itself. And then I think in another couple slides here, we'll have time to break for a question, or a couple questions. So I mostly summarize this, but we just wanted to put it kind of side by side here. So this is just kind of a side by side of the current rule and what we have now under Sport Pilot 2.0. So there's no more gross weight. It used to be 1320 unless you're flying a seaplane. Maximum clean stall speed goes from 45 to 59, like we talked about. There's no more maximum speed. And the reason why is because if you have an aircraft that stalls clean at 59, and also, and by the way, that's like, in cruise configuration, right? There's not really any way to get to 250 knots from a 59 knot stall speed. So they just deleted that entirely. Plus the fact that 250 is the speed limit at the altitudes you'd be flying at anyway. So you're good there. Maximum seats 4, but you can only have 2 occupants. We talked about the propeller. We talked about the undercarriage. We talked about the power plant, and night privileges. Okay, so a sport pilot can now fly at night. However, big however, they have to have, first of all, an endorsement. We'll talk about how endorsements work with sport pilot in actually on the next slide. But you do have to have specific training to fly at night. It's kind of an add-on. And you have to have a current, either third-class medical certificate or above, or basic med. So those of you who are thinking about flying as a sport pilot coming from having flown as a private pilot or something like that, you're thinking, well, what does this do for me? Well, it doesn't really do anything for you, because if you have those medical certifications, you can just exercise your private pilot privileges. But if you're a sport pilot and you were originally certificated as a sport pilot, now you've got kind of an upgrade path, right? If you can pass a medical certificate, and you don't have any concerns about that, you can add night privileges to your certificate. You can add a bunch of other privileges that we'll talk about in just a second here. Go ahead, John.
Real quick, I think, again, it's important, a couple of things. If you look at the Sport Pilot 2.0 parameters that you just ran through, let's put that in context for everybody tonight. If you really do an analysis, that's about 70% of the single engine piston fleet fall into that category, and now can be utilized for the sport pilot environment, training for sport pilots to operate. And what Tom just said about the endorsement process of training and endorsements to add a la carte additional privileges, that's huge. For all of us in the flight instructor world, we know that the flight instructor is the individual that has the relationship with the student, really understands the strengths and weaknesses, and is ultimately the biggest responsibility for ensuring safety of flight when it comes to pilot performance, not a DPE. Karen and I both know we get one glance at a check ride on a particular day and a particular hour, and that is not the full story of an individual. Everybody as a CFI that works with students, you know them, you know the ins and outs of what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and to be able to do training and provide additional endorsements as the instructor, that is so much a better way to enable people to have additional privileges than trying to do it through a check ride process with a DPE. So we really believe in that training and endorsement philosophy when it comes to flight instructors being responsible for ensuring safety and a good outcome. It's just they're in better hands. The safety factors for all sport pilots are in better hands by flight instructors carrying that on their shoulders.
Right. And obviously that's a deep responsibility for every flight instructor who's working with sport pilots and considering those endorsements, because there's no other check on it. So they really have to keep up that quality level of training.
Yeah, which we, of course, do today. I mean, I got my tailwheel endorsement. That's, kind of a tricky thing. And, it was entirely on the CFI who trained me and then sign me off that to ensure my proficiency, at least at the time I received that endorsement. And then, obviously it's up to me to stay recurrent. All right, we'll talk. We're going to talk a little bit about more sport pilot limitations on the next slide here. But yeah, the whole endorsement thing, we'll talk about. I keep saying we'll talk about that a little bit later, but it is coming just a little bit farther down the presentation. We'll talk about the minimum requirements for the sport pilot in a little bit. But that endorsement system is kind of the key to why this is a cost-saving thing for a lot of folks. We keep hammering the point that, look, the standards really aren't that much different. The realistic amount of hours to complete every individual task isn't that much different, but it's the fact that you can add a lot of these, what would ordinarily be prerequisites for the private later on after you already have the certificate, that really allow you to strip down the certificate, and in a lot of circumstances save significant numbers of hours. So we'll talk about that a little. Got to stop saying that as my catchphrase, but we'll talk about that a little bit farther down. Let's talk about some other sport pilot limitations here. So as we just said, you're limited to day VFR unless you're endorsed and have that medical certificate. At or below 10,000 MSL or 2,000 AGL, whichever is higher. Now, us flatlanders down here, that's not too much of a limitation for us. Recognize that up in the mountains, it's a little bit different. We did actually try to get a little bit more AGL buffer zone there, so you're not quite so concerned when you're flying over to higher terrain. But the FAA didn't really want to budge on that one, so we're still working on that. A couple of the endorsements that are available as add-ons would be towered airspace. So if you want to fly into Bravo, Charlie, or Delta, you need a one-time endorsement to do that. And then that VH thing comes back. So if you have a max cruise at max continuous power of below 87 knots in the aircraft that you were originally certificated in, you have to get an endorsement to fly an aircraft faster than that. And conversely, if you fly an aircraft faster than that, you have to get an endorsement to fly something slower than that. So I think that's a really good system. I think that's really clever. So if you get your if you get your certificate in a J3 Cub, you actually have to have training and endorsement to fly a 172, for example. It's not just an open door. There actually is a formal process. In addition to the type-specific training that you should be getting anyway, you actually have to be signed off to fly something faster. If you learn to fly in a 172, or maybe something a little faster than that, and now you want to fly a Quad City Challenger, which is a fixed-wing single-engine aircraft and handles a lot different than a traditional aircraft, you have to get an endorsement to fly anything less than 87 knots. So that's kind of a feature that's built into it, and it actually has a few other consequences as we go down the road of requirements here as we go through this. You may split pro rata expenses as a sport pilot, but you may not fly in the furtherance of a business. So all of those little exceptions that private pilots have, things like charitable flights, things like flying the furtherance of a business as the traveling salesperson example and stuff like that. You can't do that as a sport pilot. And it is a non-ICAO compliance certificate. So it's only valid within the U.S. unless a foreign country endorses it or authorizes it. I believe that the only country that authorizes the current sport pilot rules formally is the Bahamas, but there may be a few other. There are several other Caribbean countries that are known to be favorable to sport pilots. Sometimes that's a case-by-case basis. Sometimes it's a blanket exception. And the big one that we really need to work on is Canada. We've been talking to our counterparts over at AOPA and COPA on that, and we're working it. We'll see where we get with that. All right, one more slide, and then we'll break for some questions here. So, if somebody is a private pilot who wishes to exercise sport pilot privileges, so why might you do that? Well, the big one is the medical certification requirements. As most of you know, to fly as a sport pilot, your most recent medical, I'm skipping down here, but your most recent medical your application has to have been successful. So you must have applied for and received a medical certificate that was not subsequently denied, suspended, or revoked. You can walk away from a special issuance. That's okay. That's a common misconception that if you're on a special issuance, you have to stay on a special issuance. You can walk away from a special issuance, but your most recent medical, if you've applied for a medical, has to have been successful to fly as a sport pilot. So obviously, if you're a private, you've had at least one medical, and that most recent medical cannot have been denied, suspended, or revoked. Now, that doesn't let you off the hook entirely. That's another, I don't know if it's a misconception, but it's certainly a concern that plenty of people have, and understandably so. The regulation that you essentially have to comply with as a sport pilot is 6153B. Now, that is distinct from 6153A. And I'm just going to rattle this off the top of my head because I've explained this so many times. 6153A is the one that you have to follow if you have a medical certificate. And that basically stops you from flying if either of two conditions are present. Either one, you have a condition that makes you unable to meet the requirements of Part 67. So in other words, a disqualifying condition. Or two, you're taking a medication or receiving treatment that makes you ineligible to meet the requirements of of Part 67. So if you have a third-class medical, let's say, and you have a heart attack and you have a stent put in and you're doing great, you've never felt better, you've aced all your stress tests, everything is good, you still have to stop flying until you get reestablished on a special issuance, because that coronary artery disease requiring treatment is a disqualifying condition, not just for the third class, but for basic med as well. Doesn't say that for sport pilot. What it says for sport pilot is you simply cannot fly if you know or have reason to know of a condition that would make you unable to complete that flight safely. Paraphrasing a little bit there. So what does that mean? Well, that means that you need to have an honest conversation with your doctor about any conditions that you may have and how that may affect your ability to fly safely. And ultimately, that power is in your hands to make a responsible decision. So it is certainly not a free-for-all. There is certainly a self-certification element that is present for any pilot on any flight, but it's just that much more important for a sport pilot, because that is the medical standard that you're flying under.
And so, Tom, I think it's worth pointing out the reality of that is, how many of us, if you've ever gone, and I haven't, but I know plenty of people who have, if you've ever gone through a special issuance process, you'll have your cardiologist, in the example Tom gave, your cardiologist is saying, you're great, everything looks wonderful, you should be fine to fly or operate heavy equipment or whatever you wish to do. But yet the special issuance process requires expensive testing and submission of that testing results that takes months and costs thousands and thousands of dollars. That's the key difference. Once you know and have backed up through a medical expert, your doctor, your family doctor, the person that knows you best, that you have dealt with your deficiency and you are now safe to go out and fly under, as Tom described, under 6153 as a sport pilot, paragraph B, you can make that evaluation and go do so. And that's a big difference. It's a major plus for GA.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting, because I do, part of my job is also doing medical counseling for EAA members. The standards, the evaluation standards that the FAA uses do evolve over time. Just in the time that I've worked here, they've changed significantly, especially for our example of cardiology. They don't actually require a lot of the annual testing that they used to, but you still have that kind of metaphorical anvil hanging over your head whenever you have a third class medical, whether it exists there or you just perceive it to be. We're all a lot of us here are pilots, right? We all know that feeling. And rightly or wrongly, that notion stops a lot of people from addressing issues that need to be addressed. My line on sport pilot is, we've taken away that excuse. Get yourself checked out. Make sure you maintain a high level of health, and it's incumbent on all of us to recognize when it's time to hang it up. And it's also incumbent on us to keep an eye on our peers too. It's like any other pursuit, that carries a certain amount of risk and requires a certain amount of acuity and fitness. So If you meet that standard, that medical standard, your driver's license is essentially your medical at that point, at least for the purposes of showing it to the FAA. And you have to comply with all sport pilot limitations. So that's it. There's no other paperwork. You don't have to go into IACRA and change something to become a sport pilot or anything like that if you hold a higher privilege, higher rating. You're simply a private pilot exercising sport pilot privileges at that point. So if you get ramp checked, you step out of your 172 on a clear VFR day and tell the inspector, here's my private pilot certificate. I am a private pilot exercising sport pilot privileges. Here's my driver's license. That's my medical documentation, essentially. And here is my sport pilot compliant aircraft that I've been operating under sport pilot restrictions. And that's basically it. Okay, with all of that, we've come to our first break for questions. Karen, what do we have?
Thank you very much. We do have some very good questions here, and thank you both for bringing the medical aspect up, because a silver lining of this, in addition to a lot more people who likely had wanted to fly. In fact, just today I got a call for a gentleman looking for flight training for his granddaughter, and he mentioned, because he sounded pretty knowledgeable, asked if he was a pilot, and he said no, but he always wanted to be. So we had a great conversation, and he indicated he's 68 and felt he was too old to start to learn to fly. So I had a wonderful talk to him about the new sport pilot opportunity, and he was quite excited. In fact, he said he was going to start calling flight instructors immediately. So there are opportunities out there for instructors and schools. We have a question from Bob. Okay, constant speed props are permitted for sport pilots and airplanes, but not gyroplane pilots. That doesn't make sense. Can you explain?
Yeah. And Bob, I'm not sure if I responded to your email or not, because I did get another. I don't know if there's two gyroplane pilots out there asking the same question or not. I don't think that was potentially considered by the folks who wrote the rule. Now, when you're talking constant speed propeller for a gyroplane, my understanding is that the pitch of the rotor is able to be controlled, but the propeller cannot be constant speed. So if there are gyroplanes out there that do have constant speed propellers, that was not put in for whatever reason into the final rule. We can certainly keep an eye on that, and occasionally parts of Part 91 or 61 do get opened up, and it may be possible to add that privilege later if that is a significant want and need in the community. I do know that, for example, for electric aircraft, it is very advantageous to have a constant speed prop and things like that.
Thank you. Jack asks, can I find a list anywhere of new sport pilot aircraft? Now, I don't know if you receive that question regularly, Tom, or if we'd like to go back and ask Jack for a little additional definition.
Yeah.
New.
Well, okay, so it could be one of two things. It could be either new aircraft that are newly eligible for sport pilots, in which case I don't have a comprehensive list of that right now. I mean, basically, you see what the parameters are. Start opening up the POHs and taking a look. And I'm sure we or somebody else will develop a more comprehensive list at some point. In terms of the new aircraft that are being certificated under the new light sport category, that's going to take some time because that actually has not been implemented yet. We'll talk about the light sport category in a little bit more detail later.
Okay, thank you. Mike asks, for renter pilots, on your experience so far, what is your perception of how the new rules are being received by insurers and flight schools, flying clubs, to rent their existing eligible aircraft, for example, 172s, to pilots who wish to operate under the new rules?
Sean, do you want to take the insurance question?
Yeah, sure. So we've had a varying degree of inquiries along that exact line of questioning. We've had some folks that have had no problem at all, and we've also had some folks that were told, no, we're not doing that. Our insurance doesn't allow that. Well, the reality is most of the major underwriters, including Star Aviation, have told us at EAA that the sport pilot with driver's license medical is not an issue for them. It's a moot point. They are happy to provide insurance to commercial fleets that are renting to sport pilots. So if you come across a flight school or an FBO that is digging in saying, well, our insurance doesn't allow it, tell them to go back and talk to their insurance provider, because the major aviation insurance underwriters are allowing it. And it's like anything, it's new, people have to learn about it. It's going to take a little time, and there'll be a little bit of resistance to change, or guardians to the gates of change, however you want to describe that. But they're coming along. I mean, matter of fact, I just got a real pleasing email from a fellow up in the Northwest that initially had problems with the FBO or his flight school, saying, no, we're not going to do that. And when he kept pushing and kept showing them some of the facts that we helped provide them, they went back and worked with their insurance provider, and now they're renting it. So it was a real a good news story that he was able to, with persistence, turn the tide and have his particular FBO in his area be able to rent that airplane to a sport pilot or somebody exercising sport pilot privileges.
Yeah, and I think it's worth. Oh, sorry, Karen. I was just going to add to that. I think it's worth noting too that since 2004, there have been plenty of flight schools and plenty of FBOs that rent aircraft, and plenty of flying clubs that have supported sport pilot. And from an insurance perspective, some of the LSAs that have been out there actually have a higher hull value and potentially harder insurability than some of the aircraft that are newly eligible now. So it'll iron out. Sorry, go ahead, Karen.
Right. Yeah, and obviously, insurance is really based on the insurance company's experience. So really, once sport pilots are out there in great numbers and proving that they're flying safely, this becomes a moot point. So it's really this initial experience and uncertainty, I think, goes away. And thank you for being advocates for pilots, truly. Brian also asked a very similar question about how are the insurance companies going to handle flight time requirements being lower to fly something like a 182 as a sport pilot. But I think you've dealt with that. The insurance companies are accepting of this.
Yep. And remember, at the end of the day, it's about meeting the standards. We all know as flight instructor, hours don't equate to a really good thing or a really bad thing in general. It's all about how well does that student meet the requirements of each task and the standards associated with those tasks.
Yeah, ability-based.
Yes.
Meeting the requirements. Speaking about requirements, Robert asked, does a sport pilot need to take another knowledge test to upgrade to a private pilot certificate?
Yes. Right now, there is not a direct upgrade path like there is for a couple of other certificates from private to sports. So you have to basically do the whole thing over again, knowledge test and practical test. I have a little bit more information I think on a future slide on that.
Okay. And speaking about future slides, there's another questions pending, but we'll hold those a bit so we can continue moving forward. We're about halfway through the slides, and we're quarter to our time already.
Quarter to our time. All right. I guess I better speed up as fast as I can. We'll see.
Okay.
All right. We'll see how we do here. Okay. All right. So just a couple quick examples here. Let's just go through. So there was a question about, do we have a list of eligible aircraft? Well, this is a good example of how to kind of evaluate an aircraft, whether or not you can fly as a sport pilot. So a steerman, pretty a bit of a handful as an airplane if you don't know what you're doing. Can a sport pilot fly it? Well, let's take a look. Clean stall speed of 59 knots or less. Yep, it meets that. Has up to 4 seats. Yep, I think we meet that pretty well. So can a sport pilot fly it? Yes, but first of all, they need a tailwheel endorsement. It's a tailwheel aircraft, and they need a high performance endorsement, which yes, a sport pilot can get. There's nothing in 6131 that says a sport pilot cannot get a high performance endorsement. It just hasn't really been relevant until now. So yes, a sport pilot could fly a steerman. Now again, what have we been talking about? We've been talking about endorsements when appropriate, and of course training. Would you want a brand new sport pilot to fly a steerman with no additional training? No, of course not. Would you want a private pilot brand new with no additional experience or training to fly a steerman? No, absolutely not. So the baseline level of training isn't that much different between the two certificates, and that is going to basically the recurrent training that you get, the type specific training that you get, and the endorsements that you pick up. That's really what rules the day in terms of whether you're safe or not in a particular airframe. All right, let's keep moving then. one more example. I picked a weird one because it allows us to talk a little bit about some of the endorsements for sport. A Culver Cadet. So, does it have a clean stall speed of 59 knots or less? Yes. So we're good there. It has 2 seats, so you're good there. What endorsements do you need? Well, you need a complex endorsement or a retractable landing gear Sport Pilot endorsement. So we haven't quite gotten there yet in the slides, but Sport Pilot creates 2 new endorsements, one for retractable landing gear and one for a manually controllable propeller. So if it's a FADEC, you don't need anything additional. If it's single lever power, you don't need anything additional. But if it's blue knob or blue lever, then you need a manually adjustable pitch propeller endorsement. And then you need an endorsement for the retract. So the Cadet has a fixed pitch prop. So you don't need that blue knob endorsement, but you do need the retracts endorsement. Now, if you have a complex endorsement, that covers you for it. And if you're a private pilot exercising Sport Pilot privileges, then that is an included privilege. Because a private pilot ordinarily does not need an endorsement unless they're flying a true complex aircraft to fly something with retracts. Again, should you have type-specific training? Should you have some kind of discipline training to make sure that you understand how to fly a retractable gear aircraft? Absolutely, you do. And for the Sport Pilot certificate, we actually require an endorsement for that. So in some ways, the Sport Pilot certificate actually requires more training or more formalized training, at least in this regard, than the private pilot certificate does. Okay, now the really, to me, exciting thing, and I think as we talk about it more, it's going to be exciting to you, especially if you are involved with the management of a flight school or really just kind of want to see aviation thrive at your local airport. There is a instructor rule that is attached to Sport Pilot, subpart K of part 61. These are the requirements for it. 150 hours total, pass the FOI, pass a knowledge test, pass a practical test, but there's no prerequisite for instrument rating or commercial as there is for a traditional CFI. So that's it. Now, in exchange for all of that, what can you actually instruct? So you may receive compensation. So that's the one exception where a Sport Pilot can receive compensation is if they have that instructor certificate. You can train students toward a Sport Pilot certificate. So, and the FAA actually has issued a legal interpretation on this. So if you're training a Sport Pilot candidate and then the candidate decides that they want to go for a private, the hours that they spent with you training do not transfer toward the higher certificate. And they did that for a reason, especially if you're a traditional CFI, a subpart H CFI, you probably look at it, your initial thought was, well, wait a minute, is there going to be a giant group of Sport Pilot instructors undercutting me? Well, no, because they can only train toward the Sport Pilot certificate. Now, if the Sport Pilot candidate gets their Sport Pilot rating, they can then transfer the relevant hours toward a higher certificate. So there's kind of that checkpoint. They have to get to that Sport Pilot certificate before they can transfer the hours upward. And you can only instruct in a Sport Pilot eligible aircraft, but as Sean said, that's most of the training fleet, so we're good there. And if you have the appropriate endorsement, you can instruct at night. So think about the implications of this. First of all, who can do this now? You can have a lot of folks who are very passionate about flying, but maybe never put aviation into their career plans, at least not flying airplanes into their career plans. People like me, I've got 650 hours. I've been flying for, going on 14 years at this point. I may not have as many hours as a lot of you out there, but, I've been around the block a few times. And if I had the time for it, it would be great to be able to give back to the community. But I'm not going to go out and get a commercial certificate just so that I can, instruct on the weekends or something like that. That definitely blows up any risk cost benefit for me. But go out and get this, yeah, sure. I do something like that.
All right, so let me jump in here, Tom,
yeah,
because I'm going to add for our audience tonight, all of us who are CFIs, you guys and gals all know what I know, which is when do you really learn something best? You learn it when you teach it. And can you imagine seeing a fellow like Tom or doesn't matter, guy, girl, you name it, that decides they want to go out and get a Sport Pilot instructor and then start teaching? That's the person that I want to teach further certificates and ratings to, is holy cow, are they going to be sharp? after going through that process of having taught at this fundamental level. To me, this is groundbreaking.
Absolutely, Sean. And, yeah, go ahead, Karen. Yeah.
This has created a lot of excitement in the community. Within 24 hours of the announcement at AirVenture, 4 different pilots came to talk to me about becoming sport pilot instructors. They were so excited about it, and they were all very experienced aviators, had at various points had the yen to instruct others, but just as you pointed out, Tom, they weren't going to go through the time, cost, and effort to become a CFI. So I think that we have a wonderful opportunity for people to create that legacy, pass on their knowledge, and really be excellent educators for the next generation.
Well,
absolutely.
And Karen, you and I talked the other day about this. The other element of this that all NAFI members will truly identify with is that folks that go to pursue this, like Tom just described, they're people that are passionate. They want to do this not as a time building exercise, not because they want to land that corporate job or that airline job. They're going to do this because they love the thought of teaching and giving back to aviation. And let's face it, 99.9% of NAFI members feel that exact same way. That's why they're members of NAFI. So this is a significant cultural improvement to see this come to pass and welcome this in the ranks of flight training.
Absolutely. And of course, if you have career plans beyond instructing, that's fine. That's great. Obviously, as long as you are a good, passionate instructor while you're in the business, that's all we care about. But, I use myself again as an example because I learned to fly back in the 2010 to 2012 time frame. And if you remember that time, those were dark days for airline hiring. So the folks that were actually instructing at my local airport were these kind of, we'll lovingly call them weekend warrior type folks, people who did it for a little extra money, but they had a day job, and they were great enthusiasts with a lot of experience, and it was a lot of fun. So,
all right, so we're going to go at warp speed from here.
Yeah, I got you.
Warp 9, please.
All right. So we've already covered most of these, so I'll just run through this real quick. The minimums for the Sport Pilot Certificate. And remember, these are minimums, and that's all they are. 20 hours dual, 20 hours total, 50 hours dual, 5 solo, 2 cross country. The long solo cross country is 75 nautical miles in the longest leg. Yeah, and I don't know why I put 25 in there. I'm sorry. So yeah, 2 legs of 25 and 1 leg of 75, I believe, is the requirement. Now, there's been a criticism of the Sport Pilot Certificate that you don't have to do the flight by reference to instruments requirement that you have to do for private. That's actually not true. If you look at the prerequisites for the solo cross country, if you are flying for a if you are going for a Sport Pilot Certificate and you are flying an aircraft with a VH of greater than 87 knots, so 172, the traditional trainers, and this is written into the rule, you have to still do that flight by reference to instruments before you go out and do the cross country, same as any private pilot candidate. But you don't have to do that if the VH is less than 87 knots, which is a great little escape hatch if you're training in a Cub, for example.
So Tom, here's the beauty of it for our NAFI audience. All of the tasks are required that Tom just described, but not the 3 hours. So you can spend as much time as you want or as little time as you want, as long as you know all of the tasks have been covered and that particular student met the basic standards of performing those tasks. It's so much more elegant than having to go plug 3 hours in and making sure you got 3 hours in the logbook before you send them off to the DPE.
Absolutely. And I've also heard some criticism of the long solo cross country length, but I mean, again, these are minimums. You could always assign something longer, and if you're training somebody at a Piper Cub, it's still going to take them all day to do a 75 nautical mile cross country. So, yeah.
Now, next we'll be talking about the PTS versus the private pilot ACS, and you could probably just summarize this in a couple sentences, Tom.
Yeah, it's basically the same. The only difference is that so you don't have to do the flight by reference to instruments, and you don't have to do anything in the private pilot curriculum that's not in the sport pilot curriculum. The only other fundamental thing is that the sport pilot is still a PTS, private's an ACS. That's going to change soon, but there's a little bit of a difference on the slow flight. By the way, when you take the quiz, we got something wrong in here. We said that in that that the stall requirements were different. They're not. The slow flight requirements are just slightly different in terms of the speeds that you have to fly, but that's basically it. All right, we can continue moving on here. Do you mind? I guess I'll just have to blow through this question block here so we can get to the end.
So we have some, if you want to put on the slide, Tom. So we do have some very good application-based questions. And what we're going to do is hold those to the end, because I can see we're coming up on the hour. So we'll probably go about 10 to 15 minutes longer. So everyone, hopefully you can stick with us, and you're going to see some really good questions that you get answers to at the end. All right. So if you want to continue on, Tom.
Yep, moving along. So this just summarize. We'll skip this one. This one just summarized the fact that a sport pilot can fly an aircraft that's certified in any category, just as long as they meet the sport pilot cert requirements, which I think we've mentioned quite a few times here. Already summarized that with the with the light sport category, but just basically to suffice it to say, there's some really exciting stuff coming on the horizon for new aircraft that are certificated at the lowest certification cost that we can possibly offer for these types of aircraft. So airplanes will never be cheap, but they'll be as cheap as we can make it, and hopefully the next generation of flight school aircraft, as the venerable fleet continues to age. Just a sentence or two on what this means for you as an instructor and you as a flight school, if that applies to you. You have an entry-level pilot certificate. One thing we didn't cover on the pilot certification requirements is that there are so many things now that are add-on endorsements that may apply to you and where you fly, or they may not. So, if you're out in a country airport and you're flying a 152 or something like that, there's very few endorsements that are required. You can just stick to the fundamentals. Get through to solo, get through the cross-country stuff, do all the things you need for the check ride, and then take your check ride. Believe it or not, you can do that in around 35 hours or so. We've done it with our Sport Pilot Academy, but more importantly, there are people in the field that regularly do this. Again, simple aircraft at small airports don't require tower fields, things like that. And we can get you through to a certificate. So that means affordability. That means better retention. That even means an upsell opportunity. If you've got somebody who's really gung-ho, you can try to sell them the private, but now you have that entry-level option to get them through the door. It's ready-made for your current fleet. There's more aircraft coming on the horizon, and we talked about that new cadre of instructors. All right, Sean, why don't you take us home with the final summary here, and then we just barely made it.
All right, well done, Tom. Yeah, Karen. All right, so reinvigorated opportunities for those who've always dreamt of learning to fly, as Tom has already described, and Karen has reemphasized and supported here. This is the lowering of the fence, so that people have always dreamt about it and said, no, I just can't afford it. I can't spend $12,000 or $14,000 to go do this. You can now go do this for a significantly less amount. So you'll break down those barriers, and you'll open up those opportunities for people that have just said, I'm dreaming about it, but I'm not really going to be able to do it. They're going to be able to do this. And by the way, they'll finish more regularly and they won't drop out as much. Affordable, effective training that yields higher retention and completion. New, affordable, modern aircraft designs. That's another big exciting part that we're yet to fully recognize and realize, and that'll happen as the aircraft cert sport pilot, or excuse me, light sport category comes to fruition next summer, July of 2026. We'll see those rules and the FAA policies to support them become final, and you can bet your bottom dollar you'll see new manufacturers as well as existing longtime manufacturers that see opportunity with this and bring things to the market that we just haven't seen before. Fewer mandatory hours, same fundamental standards. That's the key thing. And we all know this as CFIs. It's training to a standard. It's ensuring that those students can consistently meet those standards, and then appropriate certification through a DPE as appropriate, not overboard, so that the instructor still controls most of the destiny of that individual and making sure that they're safe. Continued safety still hinges, as I said, on instructor quality and that learning continuum. We are where the rubber meets the road, my friends. We all know this as flight instructors, and that's the way it should be, frankly. As I've described already tonight, we know that individual far better than anybody else, and we can ensure that they meet those standards on a consistent basis. So as Karen said, it's on our shoulders, but it should be. We're good at it. That's what we as flight instructors do. Let's take that and run with it, because that's going to be a far more effective way to ensure safety.
All right. Thanks very much, Sean. And just one last slide for our contact. This is how to get a hold of us. You can call the main number for EAA. Just ask for Tom or Sean. We'll be happy to talk. And then we have 2 email boxes that we regularly monitor for MOSAIC questions. Karen, over to you.
And just pointing out, NAFI was actually represented on one of the MOSAIC subcommittees, very actively involved, where I know we had good influence on some of these very positive decisions that were made on the standards. So we're very happy to be involved with that. The committee meetings are ongoing. Also, NAFI as an organization, we are working on content to help flight instructors best learn about this, what it means to you individually, the opportunities for your flight schools, and developing content that you can share. Okay, if we go back to the remaining questions, there's some very good application-based questions. So Tom wonders, if I hold an ATP, can I operate day IFR under sport pilot rules?
Nope, sorry. It's still day VFR for the privileges. You cannot operate IFR under sport pilot privileges.
Okay, thank you. Dwayne wonders, will there be an add-on knowledge test that will bridge the gap?
In the future,
between sport and private.
There's no formalized proposal for that yet, but that's certainly something that we'll be pushing toward.
And Karen, as you know, we're going to need to see a better table in the ACS. Well, ultimately, when we get to a sport pilot ACS, we'll look forward to seeing a table that shows how to transition somebody as a DPE from sport pilot to private, like we do with other certificates today, right? Right now, as Tom described, you got to do the whole test. But someday, when we get those ACS requirements met, you'll see a more effective table that allows us to do the things that are relevant to take you from sport to private.
Right. Similar to, for example, if you hold a current, name your certificate, there would be a matrix which indicates what components of an ACS you don't need to repeat in the examination process.
Yeah, that's exactly what we want to get to. We're not there yet, but that's where we would like to get to. You bet.
Right. Okay. Jerry indicates he is a sport pilot instructor and a private pilot. Good for you, Jerry. Do I need an endorsement to teach in a 172? May I teach in light sport aircraft without further endorsements? You
may. It's just like the sport pilot, the sport pilot certificate. As long as you're properly endorsed to fly the 172, I assume the VH and whatnot.
Okay. And then also, would you like to mention AC 6165K and 61146?
Yes, those are were just updated, and I, off the top of my head, I'm not going to be able to tell you which is which, but there were 3 ACs that were just updated. I know the one that in particular that is helpful is the one that
6165. Tom, 6165 is the endorsement
on the endorsements. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Reed asks, can a CFI sport teach tail wheel to a private pilot?
Okay, good question. This is actually going to go back to that 6165 piece. By the way, on the ACs, we did do a story on that that summarizes the changes. Anyway, that is a good question. And it's actually not a new question, because the rule has fundamentally existed the same way since 2004 when the original sport pilot rule came out. But the privileges for the sport pilot instructor certificate say that those privileges are relevant only to sport pilots. Mm-hmm. So we have not gotten a formal interpretation from the FAA yet on that, but there are some indications that perhaps will endorse, or people exercising sport. Okay. Does that make much sense? I don't think so, because it's the same deal, but yeah.
Yep, I heard you cut out a bit. Sean, did you hear Tom fully or not?
No, he cut out. Tom, real quick, recap that sport pilot instructors cannot provide training to a private pilot. their privileges are only allowing flight training aimed at sport pilots, correct?
Yeah, so that's 146, something like that. That covers that. Or 61. No, it's one of the 61.4 rules, 61.413 or something like that. We have not gotten a formal interpretation from the FAA yet on that, but there are some indications that they are interpreting that as the sport pilot instructor certificate only applying to sport pilot privileges. Doesn't make a lot of sense necessarily because it's the same training either way, but that does appear to be where we're headed right now, but we will report on that once we actually have an answer. That come through?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay. Scott answers a question, and Sean, you might want to deal with this one. Can a private pilot DPE, meaning the qualifications to give that exam, give a sport pilot practical?
That's a great question, Karen. You do need to have sport pilot on your CLOA.
Right.
Now, in the past, it required 5 hours in a light sport aircraft. We have not yet heard from the folks in AFG and AFS, the headquarters parts of FAA that have oversight of this requirement, to see if that's going to get removed. We think it should, because now it's meaningless. Now that you can go out and conduct a check ride on a sport pilot in a 172 or a PA-28, or name your GA primary trainer that's been around for decades. Why on earth do you have to have 5 hours in an LSA? As we said, it's been decoupled. So hold that thought, and we'll see where the FAA comes out on that. But you will need to add it to your CLOA, and the question still revolves around what's going to take to add it to your CLOA. I'm an advocate for saying get rid of the 5 hour requirement. It's not appropriate anymore.
Right. So this is something the FAA is definitely working on at this point. The CLOA is the letter of authorization that each designee receives, indicating what qualifications they hold, what exams they can provide. So as Sean mentioned, technically it's a separate qualification to give a sport pilot exam. So will the FAA, how will they deal with this? Because now with the changes, it becomes less meaningful to say someone would have to have specific experience in a certain amount of time in sport pilot aircraft. So we'll hopefully hear from the FAA in the very near future. But at this point, unless someone has that specific qualification on that CLOA, they would not be able to provide sport pilot examinations as an examiner.
Ask your managing specialist. Ask your managing specialist to add it to your CLOA. Let's start that wave now. If you're a DPE and you want it added, which I think all of us should, ask to have it added, because that'll help. That'll help bring the question to a head.
Right. That is the proactive approach for those of you that are or know designated examiners, to make that suggestion that they can go to their managing specialists. Okay. Then a question from Mike. Mike has a CFI glider. Good for you, Mike. And airplane single engine land. He wants to add CFI Sport to his CFI. Does he need to do spin training beyond what he had done for a CFI glider?
I think, Sean, are spin endorsements different between category class?
Oh boy, Tom, that's a. I'm not sure. We're going to have to go back and research that one.
Well, I can tell you, as a CFIG myself, I did have to have a separate spin endorsement for gliders apart from the CFI spin endorsement.
Well, then that wouldn't have changed. That with MOSAIC, that would not have changed.
Now, I do have to add something important, though, on the CFIG to airplane question. Mm-hmm. In the past, that was an endorsement to add those sport pilot instructor privileges to an existing instructor certificate. Now, specifically for airplane, single engine land, and sea, that's a check ride. That was changed with MOSAIC. Not the greatest change, in terms of freedom and flexibility, but you do have to go through that now, just same as any other instructor would. It's not the same going the other way, though. So for both instructors and for pilots, it's it's the operating privilege system that Sport Pilot uses, and they've also gotten rid of the VNE restriction on Sport Pilots and gliders, which makes most of the glider fleet now Sport Pilot eligible. There's still that 10,000 foot restriction, though. Yes.
And for the Sport Pilot glider, you still have to have the 45 knot clean stall speed VS1, right?
Correct. So I don't know the glider fleet as well. I don't know. I would imagine a lot of them meet that, but probably there are
a lot of them do. A
Yeah.
few key ones, I think, like the K-21 and a few others may not. But yes, it is definitely a bigger aperture now. But it's not a 59 knot for glider. That 59 knots only applies to airplanes.
Right. And like I was saying, glider pilots like to fly high. I know that. So that 10,000 foot restriction may be a bit of an issue there too.
Right. And then you also have motor gliders, which are becoming increasingly popular.
You bet.
Yep. And we have one final question. Do we have a sense of how many DPEs are authorized to give sport pilot practicals at this time?
In our discussions about the need to increase the number, we have not baselined it. Now, there's about 1,100 to 1,200 DPs in total right now, and that number is continuing to grow, Karen, as you and I both know. But I don't have a baseline on how many have the authorization. We've simply been making the argument, and it's not even an argument. We've been making the case, really, that we need to be able to enable all DPEs that conduct private pilot and hire that would like to add sport pilot to their CLOA, because it's whether there's 200 now or 500. The reality is we want to have every DPE be able to perform that function if they're so inclined to do so. There's no reason not to, because it's so similar to private now.
Right. And I'd say currently it varies wildly by FSDO because it's really based on need. So it would have been related to how many people were undertaking sport pilot training, and then they would look to have enough examiners to fulfill that requirement, because every examiner with the qualification would have had to have periodic observed examinations themselves from the FAA.
Right.
So now that there will be potentially a much greater demand, we know the FAA will come across and update this to provide additional sport pilot examiners.
They're going to have to. I mean, the reality is the limitation in the past was the size of the fleet. There was only so many light sport aircraft and people training in those aircraft with the old definition of LSA. Now with what we have with MOSAIC, it's every ramp of every FBO has airplanes that are now eligible. So it's just changing the entire face of this, and we're going to need to have a DP cadre that can support it.
Okay. So I'm happy we were able to get through all the questions, but if you're looking for further information, you saw the slide. Tom is very happy to answer your questions. Feel free to contact him directly at EAA and ask your MOSAIC questions. Thank you, Tom, for putting that up again. Okay, and also, as I mentioned, at NAFI, we're working on content to help you specifically in the flight instructor arena learn more about the application of this. And flight schools obviously should realize that much of their current training fleet would be eligible for training sport pilots. So it's a wonderful marketing opportunity. Okay, and Tom, could you advance the slide, please? I think you have the controls yet.
Oh, I still have the.
Yep. You can continue having the controls. I just wanted to thank you very much for such an excellent presentation. We answered many questions, and I think hopefully create a lot of excitement about these opportunities. Asking our audience to please save next month. So again, it will be on January 21st. Join us for the 100th MentorLIVE. And this is going to be a collage, if you will, a compilation of some of the very best advice, interesting stories, and content over those last 100 MentorLIVEs. So wonderful opportunities to learn a lot in a short period. The host is going to be Aaron Dabney. He is on the NAFI board, a very active flight instructor and teacher at Baylor. And he is also our organizer for all of these MentorLIVE broadcasts. Thank you very much, Aaron, and we look forward to seeing you next month. And thank you, Pilot Institute, once again for sponsoring this very, very valuable information. Okay, and a reminder to everyone, now that you've completed watching this, you can go and take your wings credit, and you should be able to earn that right away. And Thomas pointed out there is one of the quiz questions. If you take it this evening, it actually would unfortunately give you the wrong answer. So when it comes down to the question regarding differences between the ACS and the PTS, what was the correct answer?
So,
Tom?
the correct answer that we put in was the stall series. The actual correct answer, at least among those that are listed, is that there is no significant difference.
Right. So you'd say there's no significant difference. However, if you take the examination tomorrow when it will be updated, then it will be reflecting the stall series difference. Okay. One more click for you, Tom. Thank you. And thank you again for everyone for watching, staying with us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Instructors, are you tired of students showing up unprepared? With Pilot Institute Online Ground School, they show up ready. No more unpaid ground lessons that run long. No more frustrated students blaming you for the slow progress. Instead, you get students who learn quickly, recommend you to friends, and also make your job easier. The result? You build flight hours faster, your students are going to succeed, and then also you get to focus on the flying. With a 99.9% pass rate and 33,000 five-star reviews, we are the ground school that instructors trust. Plus, it's completely free for CFIs. Get your free instructor account today at pilotinstitute.com/instructor.